Welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst. And today we are continuing with our discussion about food stamp or SNAP program, or EBT as it's called. The day has arrived. Today is the first of the month, and the EBT, electronic fund transfer payments, have not been made by the federal government because it's in lockdown right now because of the shutdown. And so people are crying and pounding their fists and demanding that the government reinstate the food stamp program to 42 million people in the United States. That's right. 1 out of 8 people are being fed by the government. 1 out of 8 people within our borders, our boundaries, are being given free food by the taxpayers. Yes, 1 out of 8, 42 million people. And we all know that 42 million people in this country are not starving. We know that 42 million people in this country are not even close to starving. We know that 42 million people do not need taxpayer-funded free food. We know that. We know good and well enough that there are probably at least half the people on the food stamp rolls, maybe even 3/4 of the people on the food stamp rolls, can get along just fine without the government giving them free food every month. So this crisis, it's a manufactured crisis, it's a propaganda crisis, it's a massive failure in personal responsibility on the part of people. And it's worse than that. It is the accomplice to that personal failure of the individuals is the government. The government has aided and abetted people in this country from sidestepping their adult responsibilities and turning to government as sort of this massive earthly idol. They stopped turning to God in prayer and the church and fellow Christians. They've stopped turning to people, their fellow believers and God and church, and turn to Gov, G-O-V. Instead of G-O-D, they're dependent on G-O-V. They stopped turning from the biblical wisdom and the revelation of God and the family structure and marriage. And we have millions upon tens of millions of people in this country who are living failed lives because they're not structuring their lives according to God's will. God's will says that men and women are to get married and form families and have children in that order. You get married, you have children, and you become a family. And you are there for their structure. The husband goes out and earns the money. The wife stays home with the children and raises the children, gives them personal attention. There is order, there is balance, there is food on the table every evening for the meals because the husband is out there working, and the wife has processed that food and provided it for her family in the form of meals and lunches that she packs. And it's a balance, and it works. But we don't have a society like that works anymore because people have turned away from God and they've turned to Gov, G-O-V. And so now we have people who don't listen to God and His Word about family and marriage and children. And so you have millions and tens of millions of women, single women, trying to raise children in a home without a man, without a husband. And now it's even without a boyfriend. So it was bad enough when they were shacking up together, when this started becoming common in the 60s during the sexual revolution. Couples would just shack up, live in sin, have children, not even bother married. That was bad enough. But at least there was a man in the home who was responsible, who would tell his family, Don't worry about it. I've got this. I will take care of you. I will provide for you. That's my role. That's my God-given role, and I will do that. And that's the way that worked, even though that was not the right form. But now it's even being done away with that. Now women are simply getting pregnant and then turning to the U.S. government and saying, you support me. You be my fill-in husband. You be my substitute husband. You be the father of my children, substitute. And you pay me food money. You pay me Section 8 housing. You pay me medical care. You pay me transportation and cash allotment. You provide for me as if you're my husband. And people have done that. Women in the millions and tens of millions, especially in the big cities, have done that. They have taken the government up on their offer to be their daddy or their husband. And so we have a dysfunctional situation right now where 42 million people are bothered and disturbed and in a panic and in chaos and up in arms because the government didn't give them their free food at the beginning of the month. Today is the first of the month, and because of the government shutdown, the free food did not flow yet. I mean, we believe it will flow this month. I believe it should not flow until the whole food stamp program has been reformed from top to bottom and renewed, reviewed, and real standards are enforced. And all able-bodied men especially should not be on food stamps. If you can work, you should not be on food stamps. The Bible teaches clearly in the New Testament. Look it up. It says, if a man does not work, he should not eat. The implications of that verse mean that if you're not willing to get out there and provide for yourself or your family and your children and your wife, then you should not be on food stamps. You should not be getting food from any source, because your hunger is what drives you to find work and earn a living. That's also in the Bible. Look it up. It says a man's hunger, look in Proverbs, a man's hunger will drive him to work. That's a good thing. Getting hungry, even near starvation, is a good thing if it'll get a lazy bum off the couch. And somebody who wants to play video games all day will have to learn that if you play video games all day long, you will starve to death, because you have to get off the couch and get out there and get a job and earn a living. And especially if you're married, or even if you're not married, but if you produce children through a woman, you're responsible for that woman and the children. And so you do not deserve food stamps. This food stamps or SNAP program, here's what it means: Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. So look at the acronym there, SNAP, supplemental. That means it supplements a family or an individual who is in a dire emergency. It is a safety net for someone in our society, in our modern world, who finds himself in a situation where they have no other means of providing food for themselves or their family. It's an emergency situation of last resort. And when it's treated like it was designed to be implemented, then it works, because it is a safety net, a place of last resort that you would go to if you cannot scrape together enough money to feed yourself or your family. Then at least for a certain limited time, a temporary time, you can find government giving you assistance. Supplement your other means. In other words, you go out there and you do your best and you scrape pennies together and you find enough for food, and then the government, if that falls short, they will supplement or add to that. And if you look it up, the history of food stamps and SNAP, it was if you pay this, the government will pitch in and give you a little more. So they add on to what you already have done. But today, it is totally different from that. it has developed and devolved into this generational free welfare program where some of these women were raised on food stamps by their mother, single mother, in the ghetto or in the inner city, or even in the rural areas a lot of times. And then they learned that that's how you do things. And so they have babies, and then they get SNAP. And so they're on welfare their whole life, and then their kids grow up in that environment, and it just becomes multi-generational welfarism. That is not God's will for people. That is not what the Bible teaches, and that is not what Christianity teaches, and we shouldn't enable that dysfunctional behavior. And that's what the SNAP program is doing, enabling it. It's pathetic to see 42 million people crying about the fact that their supplemental assistance program is going to be delayed. Supplemental. So that means that for the whole month, if somebody goes out there and scrounges together 75% of the amount of money that they need for food for the month, and the government doesn't come through with that 25%, the way SNAP was originally designed to supplement, then they just have to go without for a little while. No big deal, right? No, because people are now totally dependent on the SNAP program. It's not a supplemental program anymore. It is their mainstay for food. The government is feeding 42 million people as their mainstay of food. That is not what the system was designed for. That is a gross abuse of the system, and it needs to change. So that's why I always advocate we need to reform it or totally remove it. We need to totally do away with it. We are training people to be dependent on government, on taxpayer dollars, and that cannot be sustained. As the roles expand, we saw in the presidency of Barack Obama, he comes in, almost doubles the enrollment in SNAP. And then Joe Biden, after he takes office in 2021, expands the roles greatly again. So the Democrats are committed, the liberals, the leftists are committed to expanding government at any cost, and they do it. But this will drive our nation into ruin, and we can't sustain it. So it's really good that the nation is having this moment of discussion and dialogue about food stamps, because it needs to be talked about, and it's long overdue to be talked about, discussed, overhauled, renewed, reformed, reworked, whatever word you want to describe. We need to rethink this whole idea of giving people free food, because people will take free food if you give it to them. I've seen the food stamp, the food pantries. I've worked at food pantries before. And if you put up a sign with free food, people will flock to get the free food, even if they don't need the free food. They'll take it, they'll use it, and then, what do they say? Money is fungible. They will save that amount of money on food if you're giving it free, and then they'll go buy whatever they want to do. An iPhone, sign up for an iPhone 17, the latest one, or they'll spend it on snacks and travel or whatever they want to spend money on. So people will always flock to free things. And we need to tell people, no, we cannot and will not fund your food budget every month. That is reserved for those strict emergencies, for people who cannot work, the elderly who do not have the means to provide for themselves, for the disabled who cannot work, and for those people, regular American working people who, for some reason, are laid off or some circumstance hits, medical circumstance or whatever, where they're in an emergency, and then only temporarily we will give them assistance. Unless it's long term, then they would get some kind of disability or some kind of unemployment that would cover that. But we cannot feed 42 million people on a regular basis and make that the norm, because that number is only going up. And if our nation is going to feed 42, 45, 50, 60 million, 70, 80 million people, the people at some point who are taxpayers who are footing the bill are going to rebel and say, no, we're not going to do this. We're penny pinching, we're saving, we're budgeting, we're scrimping, we're saving, and our dollar is going to people who can afford food themselves, and they're just not buying it with their own money because they want someone else to give them that food, and that is not sustainable. It isn't the biblical model. It isn't God's will. It says in the New Testament also, you can look this up, it says a man should not be idle, and he should get out there and work with his hands and be self-sufficient and support his own family and support his even extended family if they need help. It talks about someone who isn't willing to help out the family, and even their extended family is worse than a pagan. In fact, in the Christian community, they had problems with hunger. In the early church, the Jewish people, by and large, rejected the Christian message, and so that left a lot of Christians out in the cold economically, and so they had to pool their money together. They had to pull their money together and the resources, and they sold property and homes and items to try to help Christians who were struggling to get back on their feet and provide for themselves, and so on and so forth. So there was a crisis of economic proportions in the early church, and they solved it. And that's what people need to do. Again, we need to turn to the first place. The principle of subsidiarity says you solve a problem at the most local level first, and then only if that isn't sufficient, then you work your way out to something like, say, a government or national level. And the first place you would turn to if you're hurting for food and your family is hurting financially and not enough to buy the food outright is to family. And family can come together and pull the resources and share their food and pitch in and get through the temporary crisis. But if you have women who are getting pregnant out of wedlock and have no plans of getting married and have no male to support and provide for the family, then it's going to be perpetual crisis in her life financially. And so she's going to look to the government perpetually, year after year after year, decade after decade, because she doesn't have the right model for life. She's had these children, and now she's responsible for feeding the children, but she's failed to think through the whole project in raising children because she failed to put priority on a man in her house providing for her while she's raising children. And so the whole thing needs to be totally reworked. And we have to say to women, no, we're not going to provide for your children all their lives. We're not going to be the father that you failed to give them. You need to marry the man that gets you pregnant, that fathers your children. This needs to be taught and preached. It's not taught enough in the churches, even in the churches where these communities are most needed. For example, in Washington, D.C., among African Americans, the out-of-wedlock births are higher than the married births. And the vast majority of children being raised in Washington, D.C. are being raised by a single woman who never married. And there needs to be a lot of teaching about this in the churches. It's not being done. That is a huge, negligent, almost irresponsible act by pastors to not preach on these things that need to be taught, because this is part of the problem. But even the ones that do get married, there needs to be a teaching that says you need to make those marriages work. You cannot just get a divorce because you don't feel fulfilled. Because then what will happen is the woman will be in poverty because she doesn't have the man around. And she will turn to the government to be that man. And then she will be on welfare. She will be on food stamps. She will be on the housing. She will be on all of the programs she can find. And this is never meant to happen because it's not following God's wisdom found in the Bible. It's not what Christianity stands for. So we have a lot of work to do. We need to not only reform food stamp program, we need to reform the whole entitlement program to make sure we're not incentivizing dysfunctional families. We shouldn't be incentivizing young women to have children in order to have food money and housing and cash allotments. And we're doing that. We're doing that right now. Now, this was not original intent of these welfare programs in the late 60s. In the 60s, when Lyndon Johnson pushed for these and got these through Congress. That's not the intent, but that's what they have become. And they are ruining the whole social fabric of our nation. And so this food stamp crisis, if you want to call it that, is really a wake-up call, and it means that we need to go back to the basics. Now, this article in the Detroit News, it's really weird. It talks about food as a basic need, but it doesn't talk about what I just talked about. For example, it says, uncertainty over federal food aid deepens as shutdown flight reaches a crisis point. A crisis point. So people in our country cannot feed themselves, even though we're living in the most prosperous nation on earth and with the best economy. For some reason, we have this idea that the government needs to feed us. The crisis of the heart of the government shutdown fight in Washington were becoming to a head Saturday as the federal food assistance program faced delays, and millions of Americans were set to see a dramatic rise in their health insurance bills. The impact of basic needs, food and medical care, underscored how the impasse is hitting home across the United States. So we're at the point in our history of our country where we have millions and millions of people who are so dependent on government to feed them and provide health care for them and house them and give them money and provide the basic needs, as this article says. This is the declining stages of a civilization, when you have its citizens looking to the government to give them everything, the basic needs. Plans by the Trump administration to freeze payments to the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program on Saturday were halted by federal judges, but the delay in payouts will still likely leave millions of people short on their grocery bill. Okay, that shouldn't be a crisis. If you're going to be short on your grocery bill, you say, oh, I got to tighten my belt this month. It's a supplemental program, which means it only supplements what I also have to spend on food, so I won't be having the government supplement me. No, it's not that. It's not a supplemental program anymore. It is a basic necessity provider, and that is totally wrong. It all added up to the strain on the country, with a month of missed paychecks for federal workers and growing air travel delays. The shutdown is already the second longest in history and entered its second month on Saturday, yet there was little urgency in Washington. Okay. Then they talked about trying to, resolve this impasse. But my point is, why are American citizens all up in arms about the fact that the American government is not going to be able to give them a supplement of food this month? There should never be a time when you look to the government so dependently that you're in a crisis if the government doesn't feed you. If you're looking to government to meet your basic needs of life, of existence, you are already in a wrong spot. You are already in a wrong place. And you're looking to the government as if it's a god. And this whole idol, this government, big government, socialist vision is really making people into idol worshipers, because they're trying to turn people from worshiping God and looking to God and praying to God and seeking his wisdom and following his wisdom in the Bible. They're trying to turn those people away from God and to big government, GOV. And this is a recipe for disaster, and it's pathetic. It's pathetic to see people acting like this is such a big crisis, that government is not going to supplement me for my food bill this month. It shouldn't be a crisis. It shouldn't be, because people should not be that dependent. And it's just a disgrace for adults to run around in this panic mode because they're not getting free food. Where in the world did we ever get the idea that we should be dependent on free food? You know, Jesus said God said in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve were forced to leave, told Adam, "From the sweat of your brow you will bring forth food from the earth." So you're either producing your own crop, harvesting and processing that food for your own consumption in your families, or you're working and then exchanging the money that you make from work for the food at a market. You are not waiting for some entity called the government to feed you. This is not what human beings do. This is what animals do. Pets are dependent on their adult owners to feed them. But we're not animals. We are adults. We are made in the image of God, and he has a vision for us that does not include this sickening dependency on big government. And that's why socialism is so evil, and this is a sign of socialism. We need to get away from that, get back to every family unit providing for itself. In terms of emergency times, community gathers around them, helps them. The churches help their members. Families pitch in and help these temporary crises when they happen. And yes, even government can provide for those rare instances where somebody just cannot find the resources for food, and the government can temporarily step in, like the supplemental nutritional assistance. So they're assisting people when they're in their food buying. They're not doing the whole thing. They're not having these people dependent on them. But that has all been messed up and changed, and now we are in a bad spot now where we have 42 million people looking to government to feed them every day. This should never have ever been allowed to happen, and we need to pray that this changes for the good of the nation, but also the good of these people. They don't need to be looking to some earthly idol government. They need to be turning to God and God's word for their sustenance. Well, I hope that's been helpful. We will keep you posted on the developments of this situation, and we'll see you back next week. God bless.